وارزقنا اجتنابه. Of course, I see a lot of young people who come and ask me questions about marriage and wanting to get married, and not really having a clear idea about what marriage is all about, rights and obligations in marriage, how to go about it, how to pursue it once you're there, and I don't see any of them here. We're gonna touch upon some issues that are pertinent to those who are married too, inshallah. So that's going to be beneficial for everyone. But in absence of the youngsters being with us, inshallah, you as parents can pass this information on to them. And I understand that this is being recorded, live stream. So inshallah, it will reach them, inshallah. So we talked about many aspects of marriage and the reasons why we should get married and the intentions behind marriage, and how to go about seeking the husband or the wife. And then we touched a little bit about the types of marriages that are prohibited for Muslims to engage in. So we're not going to review any of this, but I'm just mentioning this as an item list of things that we already discussed, because there are a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of misconceptions as to what a young Muslim man can marry, what a young Muslim woman can marry. And that, of course, would invalidate the marriage. If it's in violation of the Quran and the Sunnah, it will invalidate the marriage right from the start. So that's important also to know. Then we got to the engagement part. And we mentioned that the engagement is just a promise for marriage. So there are really no implications for engagement. There's no contract, there's no dowry, right? There are some gift exchanges, and we talked about, if this engagement doesn't last, what are the obligations of the fiancé to, what they can and cannot retrieve, right? So we talked about that in details, and we also mentioned that, both fiancés are really total strangers to one another, meaning that there is no touching, no kissing, no, rendezvousing or any of that. It's basically, it's just a promise for marriage. Someone can pick up the phone and say, I changed my mind. Khalas. There's nothing else there are no implications to that. The only implication is that the statement of the Prophet ﷺ roughly translated to mean that one should not, once they know, upon knowledge, a man should not ask for a woman's hand in marriage that they know already that she's engaged to somebody else. They know already beforehand that she's been engaged to somebody else. Then they should not ask for her hand in marriage unless, the request for engagement came to the young lady or to the woman and she has not answered yet. She didn't say yes, okay? If she said yes, then the door is closed. If she did not answer, then the door is still open, okay? Feel free to, ask for any clarifications or, if there's something that is not, clearly mentioned here. Now we talk about the actual marriage. So as we know, it is prohibited to conduct any contract, any worldly contract in the masjid. And by the authentic statements of the Prophet ﷺ, that if you see a person conducting commerce inside the masjid, say, La arbaha Allahu tijaratak. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not give you a profit or benefit or blessings in this, contract. If someone says, I lost my phone, I lost my keys, and then they come and they hold the mic and they say, we, as attendees, we say, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never return it to you. Why? Because the masjid is not a place for that. The masjid is not a place for us to make announcements that are pertinent to the dunya only. Now, I'm not talking about being in Salat al-Jum'ah and someone is blocking somebody's, car and they need to leave and whatever. Things of that nature are administratively handled better outside the masjid, but sometimes, the situation does not allow but to make the announcement inside the masjid. The only contract that we can perform, and we are actually highly encouraged to perform inside the masjid, is the marriage contract. Why? Because it's an act of ibadah. Marriage is an act of ibadah. And we seek the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we also, sometimes we as Muslims, because we lack the knowledge, we try to do an incremental ibadah, if you will, and alongside the ibadah, we commit a lot of sins. And I just give you an example, the last marriage contract that I performed here. Of course, you know, the husband and the wife, prospective candidates for marriage, they wanted to start their, you know, family life from the masjid, and that's all well and good, right? But you look at the women in the masjid, and I understand some of them were not Muslims, and you look at the women in general, you feel like they're in a nightclub. You feel like there's some sort of a disco or whatever, and that is a clear violation of the sanctity of this masjid. The masjid, as we know, is a waqf. It belongs to none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He says in the Quran, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. That these masajid belong to none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're proper etiquettes for the masjid. In fact, a woman is not supposed to leave her home except wearing the proper Islamic attire, without wearing any perfumes or any makeup or any of that. So when you see that scene inside a masjid, and I'm sitting there and literally talking about nudity, talking about makeup, talking about perfumes, you're talking about hairdos and all that stuff, it's very, very, very awkward. But, you know, we wanted to perform the marriage contract, and we did that, and I just left. But these are things to observe. Be it, you know, again, sometimes we may not have control or influence over our own children, but we are commanded to convey the message. We are commanded to give this information, this knowledge to our children. فَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind them, because the reminder benefits the believers. And unfortunately, sometimes because of, you know, the lack of responsiveness we have to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that coming to the masjid in a state of tabarruj yields the wrong results. And then we see that we're not happily married, there's no peace in the home, you know, the family is collapsing, all of that. Well, because of what your hands have earned. You wanted to start on the right foot or in the right place on the wrong foot. You wanted to start in the right place at the wrong, you know, on the wrong foot. It doesn't work that way. We need to embrace Islam collectively in its entirety, not pick and choose. Okay? So these are things to be, you know, extremely careful about. Even sometimes the wedding parties, and I've been to some Muslim wedding parties, and the only reason why I went, because I was invited, and oftentimes just to deliver, you know, a few words of advice, you know, talk about marriages in Islam and what have you. And quite candidly, I see absolutely no difference between many Muslim marriage, you know, wedding parties and non-Muslim wedding parties. So one time I was mentioning this in front of a Muslim, he said, I see no difference. There's tabarruj here, there's tabarruj here, there's makeup, there's nudity, there's music and singing and dancing, and there's music and singing. I said, the only thing I don't see is alcohol. He said, oftentimes it's hidden. Oftentimes it's there, but it's hidden. So, you know, then why are we so concerned about, you know, the marriage, you know, conditions and pillars of the marriage and seeking the one with the good character and all of that? We are being like selective in our deen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Ya ladina aman dkhulu fi silmi kaffa. Embrace Islam in its entirety. Don't pick and choose. Because when you pick and choose, what happened? The other ayat of the Quran applies to you and I and says, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Do you see one who takes his Lord, his God, as his own way of thinking, his own perceptions, his own, you know, intellect, right? And style that they want to impose on Islam as a Muslim. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. So these are things that we need to be extremely, extremely, extremely careful about. Now we talk about the marriage contract. And there are many differences of opinions among the four schools of thoughts about what is considered a rukn. Like we talked about, we did a workshop on salah, and we said a rukn in the salah, if it's left out, right? Of course, if it's left out intentionally, the entire salah is invalid. But if it's left out by mistake, it needs to be rectified. Why? Because without rectifying it, you would lose the rak'ah. That would invalidate the rak'ah, or would invalidate your entire salah. So the rukn is a pillar, just like having a pillar in a structure. Okay? When you miss that pillar, now you compromise in the structure could collapse. Okay? That is, I'm just trying to explain what a rukn is, because we're going to build on that. And so the conditions are pertinent to the individuals, that this person is suitable for marriage. What does that mean? It means that this person is able to function as a husband, or to function as, a wife. Okay? So I'll just give one example. A husband who's been inflicted with the calamity of not being able to satisfy his wife sexually, intimately. That is an unqualified candidate. And that has to be disclosed beforehand. Sometimes there is a deficiency in the body of a woman that does not qualify her to be a wife. That needs to be disclosed beforehand. Otherwise, it's a form of cheating. It's a form of cheating, and it voids out the very purpose behind marriage. So we're going to talk about, for example, what are the objectives, behind getting married. Number one is al-imtithal li amrillah azza wa jal, is to subject ourselves to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He says, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. Marry from women, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it as sunnah for all the prophets and the messengers, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislates the best of sunan for the prophets and the messengers, and He commands us to follow the role model. Okay? So it's an act of ibadah, and according to the authentic hadith that one, who is married, they have completed the second half of their deen. And of course, that's one intention. The second intention is, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for humanity to continue to dwell the earth until the day of resurrection. And the way to continue this life, or human life on earth, is to what? To get married and have children. Because naturally, the old will get older and die. And then without the young, who's going to fuel, humanity to continue? Number three is to satisfy one's intimate needs. And they're not just emotional. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tells us in the Quran, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. And the sukna means to be emotionally, satisfied, emotionally stable. And what achieves this stability is between a man and a woman under the contract of marriage, meeting the arkan, the conditions and the pillars of Islam. And of course, in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, commands young men, يَا مَعْشَرَ الشَّبَابِ مَنْ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمُ الْبَاءَةَ فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاءٌ. So one who cannot, or young people, one who can take care of a family financially and other ways, then they must get married. And if you cannot, if you're not at that stage, فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصِّيَامِ means they should practice fasting. فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ وِجَاءٌ. Why? Because fasting sort of like curbs the sexual desire and the strength in the body and so on and so forth. So that will help you protect yourself from falling into, adultery. Okay? A fourth reason behind marriage is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, إِذَا مَاتَ الْعَبْدِ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلَهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. That when a person perishes, all of their deeds are severed except from three, and he mentioned وَوَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُو لَهُ, and a pious, righteous son or daughter that will continue to supplicate for them after they pass, away. Also, طلب العفاف, one to seek عفة. عفة means protection from falling into unlawful relationships, protection from committing, unlawful intimate relations or adultery. And the only way to do that is to suffice yourself the halal way. And in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ فِي بِضْعِ أَحَدُكُمْ صَدَقَةً. even in your intimate relations, when you approach your wife, there's a sadaqah. So the Sahaba were amazed. Said, "O Prophet of Allah, one of us fulfills their intimate desire, their sexual desire, and they get rewarded for it." So they were like amazed. He said, "Do you see if he or she does that the haram way, the forbidden way, would they not get punished?" They said, "Yes." He said, "Then doing it the halal way, you get rewarded." Okay? And of course, there are other reasons, but these are like the primary, 6 reasons why one should get married. So now we go through this process of engagement and planning and, discussing things and agreeing to everything and making sure that, that this is the right person for you. This is what the engagement period is for, is to make sure to ascertain that this is the right person, the right match for you. We talked about competency between the two spouses, and we talked about the difference of opinion among the scholars, some of which they said so long that the person is a Muslim, that's all that matters. Others said no, they need to be at a similar socioeconomic status, similar level of education, and by the way, there is a lot of credibility to that. And I've talked to many spouses who are going through a lot of difficulties, a lot of hardships, a lot of just missing each other. The competency is compromised. The competency is severely compromised. And unfortunately, I've seen some of them getting a divorce within the first 3 months. Just the first 3 months. So a competency to make sure that this person is competent to marry this person, and this person is competent to marry this person, and adhere to the etiquettes and the rights and obligations that Islam sets for us. Okay? So now we talk about the marriage contract. Marriage in Islam is a contract. Marriage in Islam is a contract, meaning that there is, among the pillars, the presence of the husband and the wife. Okay? Or az-zawjayn, as it's referred to in the Arabic language, the 2 spouses. And then there is the ijab and the qabul. The ijab needs to be performed by the wali of the young lady or the woman. Some madahib, they say, no, the wali is not a rukn. But what I'm talking about here is what the majority of scholars perceive to be, or tells us that these are pillars of a contract. So we're not going to get into any difference of opinion when it comes to the fiqh and the different schools of thought or any of that, and we're not going to settle any differences. But it's good to know what the general scholarly body say about what is considered to be a rukn. So the presence of the husband and the wife, or sometimes a person can, because of travel or because of distance between the two, they could basically appoint someone as an agent to act on their behalf. But for the woman, she needs a wali, particularly a woman who's never been married before, a bikr. She has no experience with men. She's fairly emotional. She can easily be tricked, right? So she needs a man who knows the mindset of men and can, guarantee that her rights are secured. Can guarantee that her rights are secured. So we have the husband and the wife, and then we have the ijab. The ijab is to say, زوجتك موكلتي أو أنكحتك موكلتي. I give you my muwakkila, means my daughter's hand, sister's hand, mother's hand, whatever, in marriage upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sunnah of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon the dowry we agreed to, which is as-sadaq. The dowry is also considered to be a pillar in the marriage contract in Islam. The dowry is considered. How much of a dowry? It really depends. It depends on the the socioeconomic status of the couple. It depends on affordability, right? And while we talk about sadaq, the dowry, there is no such a thing as muqaddam and muakhar. Means that they split it into 2 parts. This is what I give you up front, and in the event of a divorce is what I'll give you. There's no such a thing in Islam as muakhar. Sometimes what people do, because of tight financial situations, they say your sadaq is $5,000, but what I have now is 1,000. So I'll give you the rest later. Later means as soon as the money becomes available to you. or upon passing away of the husband. So when the money becomes available, you should not hold back. You should not hold back. You should give her the money as you promised. If you happen to perish before, then that money, that 4,000 that is left, is taken out of the inheritance of the man before the inheritance is distributed. Why? Because it's considered to be a debt. So every debt you have as a man is taken out before, and the funeral expenses and the burial expenses and all of that, that's taken out of the inheritance before any division is made to the heirs. Is that clear? So we have the husband and the wife, ijab and qabul. Said ijab zawajtuka or ankahtuka. Okay, I give you my daughter's hand in marriage, I give you my sister's hand in marriage, right? And that's performed by the wali. That is performed by the wali, which is acting as a protector. So that the wali could be the father, could be the uncle, could be the older. Of course, there's, it depends on who's present and who's not. And sometimes, people are like living in different places and whatever. So, but a wali is a person who's looking after the best interest of the young lady. So as if he is the legal guardian or the legal representative of this, bride. Okay. Now, once the wali out of these words, it has to be at the same time, okay, or then like in the same setting, okay, where the candidate for this young lady needs to respond and say, I accept. Simply accept is good enough. You can say it in Arabic, you can say it in English, you can say it in other language. Some scholars were very specific about because it's an act of ibadah. So you should say, zawajtuka or ankahtuka. Why? Because they said, salah is ibadah, it's not accepted in any other language. So therefore, since marriage is ibadah, it needs to be in this language. But that's not the majority scholarly opinion. Any language will suffice. The purpose is to indicate the intentions of these, two spouses. Sometimes the qabul can be before the ijab. Is that the young man who is the groom, you come and say, I would like to marry your daughter upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon the dowry that we agreed to. The wali could say, I accept. That also, makes the contract valid. It's better for the wali to make the ijab and then the groom, to make the qabul. Okay? And sometimes for affirmation, they ask that the wali to say, I accept. So in other words, the wali would say, zawajtuka, I give you my daughter's hand in marriage upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and upon the dowry that we agreed to. The groom would respond, I accept your daughter's hand in marriage upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon the dowry agreed to. And then the wali again would say for further confirmation, and it's not a must, say I accept. So sometimes we see that they bring a person, call him a sheikh, imam, whatever the case might be, to perform this wedding ceremony. That is not a must. That is not a must. But in absence of so much knowledge, among the Muslims, that's probably a good thing to do. Why? To ascertain that all the pillars of the contract are met. Because another pillar of the contract is what? The two witnesses. We need two witnesses that are considered to be upright, and they need to be males. Okay? So why? Because we said a contract, a marriage is a contract. A marriage, is a contract in Islam. So now we have the husband, the wife, the wali, the sadaq, the dowry, the ijab, and the qabul, and the two witnesses. With that in place, in the same time, then the marriage is performed, and that's it. Now they are a husband and a wife. If you have any questions this far, you can ask. If not, we can move on to what happens next. Jamil, you have any questions? You ready to get married? Sisters, do you have any questions? Okay. So now we move on to what happens next. Of course, there is the wedding party, okay? And the wedding party doesn't have to be something really elaborate. A lot of times people just spend so much time, effort, and energy arranging for the wedding party. And they go beyond their financial means, and sometimes they could get themselves in debt in order to impress others. There's really nothing, to impress. There's no one to impress here. At the end of the day, whatever money you spent, and unfortunately you see sometimes wedding parties cost $50,000, $100,000. I've seen several wedding parties for the same bride and groom that cost in excess of $300,000. That is a lot of money that is unnecessary. What is the purpose of the wedding party? I ask you, what is the purpose of the wedding party? Ishar, it's the thing, Jazakallah khair, Ishar, to announce the marriage. Does it take $300,000 plus to announce the marriage? It doesn't. It doesn't. What we want is the barakah. And of course, you see so many violations, as we mentioned, in these wedding parties. Men and women are gathered together, and then you'll see the music, it just blasts in your ears, right? And you have to have the DJ and the photographer and the organizers, and it's like, what are we doing here? Is this a marriage, or what is it? Showing off. Yeah. So that is totally unnecessary, particularly given the condition of the ummah. We have millions and millions of Muslims that are starved, that they don't have the means to eat one decent meal a day. We have millions of children that are dying from malnutrition. And the list goes on and on and on. So we have to take that into consideration. Particularly what the ummah is going through. Yes, it's your night. You ought to be happy. Your family needs to be happy, all of that. But it doesn't take, sometimes they do it in some countries like 7 nights in a row. There's a party every night for 7 days in a row. Isn't that true? Yeah, and probably even more, right? So they just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited us from being wasteful. إِنَّ الْمُسْرِفِينَ كَانُوا إِخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ. Al-israf means spending beyond your means or being extravagant, right? And just basically squandering the money left and right. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about those, they are the brothers and the sisters of the shayateen. Iyadhan billah. No believer, no Muslim would accept to be a brother or a sister of a shaitan. Iyadhan billah. وَلَا تَجْعَلْ يَدَكَ مَغْلُولَةً إِلَىٰ عُنُقِكَ وَلَا تَبْسُطْهَا كُلَّ الْبَسْطِ فَتَقْعُدَ مَلُومًا مَحْسُورًا. Okay, so and the ayat are many that talk about israf. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. Those when they spend, they do not spend lavishly, and they do not, become very stingy, but they seek a middle path between the two. They seek a middle path between the two. Okay? So now we come, party's over, husband and wife, they go home, they go to a hotel, wherever they want to go, they're husband and wife now. Everybody knows they got married. Okay? So now we talk about the etiquettes of the first night. Okay? It is from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sunnah of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ is that when obviously, this is a strange woman to a strange man, they gather for the first time in absolute privacy, right? And alhamdulillah, a lot of them are well educated as to what's going to happen, but there are some sunnah to follow. Because we said marriage is an act of ibadah. Means that it's governed by the Quran and the Sunnah every step of the way, what you can and cannot do. Okay? So, it is from the Sunnah, before, they have their intimate relation, is that the husband would pray a couple of rak'ahs, and, the wife would be behind him, praying her 2 rak'ahs, indicating that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given the leadership for the family to the man. And the leadership means the higher level of responsibility. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, بِمَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That the man has, basically the strength and the ability to earn a living. And of course, many women work these days. But that's how a man loses part of the qiwama, the leadership. Is that, the woman is working, she's earning a paycheck equal to his or more, or a little bit less, right? And, things start to get a little confusing, and, who does what, and, you don't tell me what to do. So qiwama doesn't mean that the man dictates, to the household what happens, but everything takes place upon consultation. And I don't want to deviate from the topic we just mentioned because in the interest of time. But the word qiwama means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given the higher level of responsibility to the man. Means that he's the one who tends to the affairs of the family. He's the one who at the end who's going to have to take charge and responsibility for the wife and the children and the household and everything that takes place in the household. That is a responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed on the shoulders of men, as he says, Ya alladhina amanu, addressing the men. قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا وقودها الناس والحجارة عليها ملائكة غلاظ شداد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. Right? He's addressing the men. Protect yourselves and your families, your spouses, your spouse or your spouses, your children from a hellfire. وقودها الناس والحجارة, fueled by people. Imagine a hellfire is fueled by people and rocks. عليها ملائكة غلاظ, guarded by mighty angels. Shidad, very tough. لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم. They do not disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with everything or anything that He orders them. ويفعلون ما يأمرون. They do exactly as they are commanded. They do exactly as they are commanded. So once they lead the man leads two rak'ahs, it's a sunnah. He takes his hand and he puts it on the forehead of his wife, and he says the dua that the Prophet ﷺ has taught us. اللهم إني أسألك خيرها وخير ما جبلت عليه وأعوذ بك من شرها وشر ما جبلت عليه, أو اللهم إني أسألك خيرها وخير ما جبلتها عليه وأعوذ بك من شرها وشر ما جبلتها عليه. Oh Allah, I seek the goodness in her, the good things in her, right? And the goodness or the good things that you have created her upon. Means that her disposition or her character or her, ما جُبِلَتْ عليه, what she's been created upon. وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ شَرِّهَا وَشَرِّ مَا جُبِلَتْ عَلَيْهِ. And I seek refuge and protection from whatever bad habits or qualities or things that she's been created upon. Okay? And she will do the same thing. So it's just not for the man to do with the wife, but she will do the same thing. She will do the same thing. And then of course, the Prophet ﷺ prohibited us from, for one to fall on his wife like, the cattle would fall on one another or animals would fall on one another. Is that there's some joking around, there's some foreplay, there's some, right? And then before, the intimate relations, one would say Bismillah. Okay? So when you say Bismillah, it's different from saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Why? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is an ayah. But Bismillah is the what? Tasmiyah. It's called Tasmiyah. Versus Basmala. Al-Basmala, when we recite a surah in the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن, هذه بسملة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. That's an ayah in the Quran. But saying Bismillah is tasmiyah, means you mention the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before that intimate relations, and then you would say the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why I said, some of this applies to those who are newlywed and some who have been, married, and maybe they have forgotten or did not learn the hadith. They say, Allahumma jannibna ash-shaytana وَجَنِّبِ الشَّيْطَانَ مَا رَزَقْتَنَا. Oh Allah, protect us from Satan. Keep him at bay. وَجَنِّبِ الشَّيْطَانَ مَا رَزَقْتَنَا. And if there is, a newborn out of this, intimate relation, oh Allah, protect them, from Satan. This dua we learn also in Surah Al-Imran, where, anybody knows? وَإِنِّي أُعِيذُهَا بِكَ وَذُرِّيَّتَهَا مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. وَإِنِّي أُعِيذُهَا بِكَ. When, the mother of Mary, she gave Maryam alayhi salam, when she gave birth to Maryam, she said, "Oh Allah, قالت ربي إني وضعتها أنثى والله أعلم بما وضعت وليس الذكر كالأنثى وإني أعيذها بك وذريتها من الشيطان الرجيم." And I also ask your protection, O Allah, for this newborn and for her offsprings. وذريتها من الشيطان الرجيم. So this is part of the etiquettes. Okay. In the next 5 minutes, I will just conclude, and basically, once that intimate relationships takes place, okay, it's not a must that you perform ghusl immediately. So what necessitates a ghusl, okay, basically, إذا التقى الختان بالختان, when the two private parts meet, that necessitates ghusl. Okay, whether there is, basically ejaculation, and forgive me for using some words here, but la haya fi din, we must explain to people what our deen teaches us. But whether there is ejaculation without insertion or insertion without ejaculation, that necessitates ghusl, and that's very important, because if you don't learn this the right way and you get up and pray, your salah is invalid. Your salah is invalid. So you need to understand that, and you need to know how to perform your ghusl. And we talked about that in fiqh al-wudu. Okay, so we're not going to repeat it. Okay. So basically, you don't have to perform the ghusl immediately after the intimate relation, unless the time for salah has come. Okay? In fact, even if the time for salah has come, it does not necessitate that you immediately perform the ghusl. But you have to do it within the time frame that is allowed for your salah. You have to do it within the time frame. In other words, you don't let the time for salah pass. You cannot miss your salah. Okay? So that's basically, of course, there are many, many other etiquettes to observe and learn along the way, and what have you. But we're just talking about now the first night. And of course, in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ told us what you can and cannot do with your wife. So there are certain acts that are prohibited, okay, and there are certain acts that are permissible, okay. So inshallah, I will stop here. We have 3 minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to to say, inshallah. Again, if you need a piece of information, if you have a question, haya is not going to be conducive for you now, because haya is in matters that are prohibited. But when it comes to seeking knowledge, when it comes to speaking the truth, when it comes to doing the right thing, there should be no haya in that. And that's why you hear sometimes saying la haya fi din. La haya fi din means that you have to learn what is required of you. You have to ask what you don't know. You have to inquire about information that is needed. Okay? That's what la haya fi din means. Means that it talks about things that are prohibited, things that are unlawful from an Islamic perspective. Okay? That's where haya is good. Yes, sister.
I have a question about why only men can do that dua after getting married. Dua when they pray the 2 rak'ats, and the only man will put his hand over her forehead and ask for her khayra or shalaha.
No.
So why just men, not women?
The man will do that with his wife, and then the wife will do that with her husband. Yeah, absolutely. But not at the same time. Like he would do that first, and then she would do that second. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يعني فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. So everybody has, their fujur, their bad habits, their ill habits, right? And everybody has their taqwa, their acts of piety and righteousness and, good moral character. So therefore, our role here is to increase the aspect of taqwa that we have and to reduce as much as possible the evil within us. But for someone to come and say, I've eliminated all the evil, that's kind of hard. Okay, so our job is to reduce the evil, reduce the bad habits, shrink it, condense it, right? And increase the goodness. Increase, all that. So that is done from both the husband, and the wife. As far as like doing the intimate relations, there's a weak hadith that says, it ought to be covered. But the scholar said that hadith, is not sufficient. It's only one weak hadith, and it's not sufficient to prove that you must be completely covered, or under the cover, during the intimate relation. So, any other questions? Jamil, when are you getting married? Got to finish college first. Yes. What is the middle path? Okay, I'll give you an example. Okay? Just for you to understand. The middle path, when it comes to spending money, right, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ يَدَكَ مَغْلُولَةً إِلَىٰ عُنُقِكَ. Means that when you have money, don't be so stingy, you don't want to spend anything. Right? And also don't be, so wasteful that you spend everything in a couple of days and then you have nothing left. So a middle path is to what? To spend in moderation and to be generous. So you help the needy and the poor and the orphan and the widow and all of that. You spend on your family, you spend on yourself, right? But within reason. Okay? Does that explain? Okay, alhamdulillah. This is just like one example. Okay? I'll give you another example. Okay? A middle path between, being reckless. You know what the word reckless means? Okay, between reckless and being a coward is to be courageous. So being reckless is sort of like any opportunity to have a fight, you go and you fight with people, right? And being a coward is that if people take your money or they hit you or they take whatever they want from you and you're just like, I'm not going to do anything. Huh? But being courageous is to stand up for yourself, to be right, to be upright, to stand up for yourself, and if someone tries to attack you to protect yourself. Okay? If someone tries to steal your money, say, no, this is mine. Can't take it. Make sense? Is that right? Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, that's good. العلم في الصغر كالنقش في الحجر. When they learn things when they're very young, yeah. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معاصيك ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا به جنتك ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا ومتعنا اللهم بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقواتنا أبدا ما أحييتنا واجعله الوارث منا واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا إلى النار مصيرنا اللهم اسألك الجنة وكل ما قرب إليها من قول وعمل ونعوذ بك من النار وكل ما قرب إليها من قول وعمل اللهم اسألك خير ما سألك منه نبيك وحبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من ما استعاذك به من شر ما استعاذك به نبيك وحبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم اسألك الرضا بعد القضاء وبرد الحياة بعد الممات والنظر إلى وجهك الكريم في غير ضراء مضرة ولا فتنة مضلة إنك ولي ذلك والقادر عليه سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك عدد خلقك ورضا نفسك وزنة عرشك ومداد كلماتك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا. Next time inshallah we'll talk about rights and obligations when it comes to the family household, be it the children or the spouses, and then the following halaqa inshallah we'll talk about fiqh at-talaq, the know-how of divorce. Because we said when it comes to performing the marriage contract, we're talking about upon the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which means that covers everything from beginning to end. Covers everything, be it the marriage ends with divorce or the marriage ends with death. It's going to end. So all of that is covered under the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. هذا والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. We do the halaqa every last Saturday of the month. Every last Saturday of the month. And they usually send an announcement on WhatsApp and emails, inshallah. But this is information that all the youngsters need to have before they venture into marriage.
Wait, end of the solar month or the lunar month?
The last Saturday of every month.
Like every solar month?
Solar, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of questions then I'm shy يعني.
اوكي ما في اشكال تفضل.
طيب. سو الموسيقى
أها.
دي جي في الوري
هذا حرام.
هذا كلها حرام
طبعا.
والله.
طبعا.
بس يعني الدبكة يعني حرام.
الدبكة بين الرجال لا بأس.
بس الرجال.
شوف يعني المشروع في what's been permissible الدف.
الدف.
Maybe the drums could fall under that, I don't know. Because even they use the drums in more and things like that, right?
صح.
But as far as المعازف, the piano and the guitar and
هذا حرام.
هذا حرام. والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم.
صح يعني you need دبكة يعني music is زهر.
ها؟
يعني to do دبكة you need music يعني.
دبكة بين الرجال. يعني women can do their thing and the men can do their thing.
الدبكة مش حرام.
Yeah, but يعني who is in his right mind would accept that his wife is standing there and shaking her booty and her chest and in front of other men?
Yes.
I mean, يعني,
Of course حرام.
yeah, so. شو قال لي أذان؟